Hey everybody, Will here from MachineLovUs.com, here with another episode in the video series on Clout, building out a YouTube data analysis system. This episode is about VueJS, making a dead simple blog, static blog, writing in Markdown. Markdown is really easy to pick up. It's easy to blog in. We don't need any extra frills or code editors or anything like that to write a blog and post it on the internet. So this episode is really taking that Vue.js blog that we have deployed on Elastic Beanstalk in AWS and adding a static Markdown, dead simple, really fast blog to it. So stick around. That's what we're going to do right now. So if you recall, last time what we did was we got our Clout website that is built in Flask, REST Plus, and Vue.js deployed onto Elastic Beanstalk. Here I am in my AWS management console, which we won't be using too much in this episode. I just wanted to show you that what we have, if you've been following along, is one running instance, which is our Elastic Beanstalk Clout environment instance running on a T1 micro AWS instance and is pretty cheap. I think thus far, for all of the things that I've been doing in this entire video series, I'm running about maybe $10 a month. So there's that. So we got that deployed last time, Flask plus Vue.js. We used a template that's available on GitHub that I referenced in the last video to get that up and running. And then this is one of the pages. I just modified the images and the coloring a bit, but that's it. And I want to add a blog to this site. I want to be able to navigate somewhere, write blog posts, not have anything too fancy. And so what we can do is create a simple Markdown site. There are a lot of ways to go with building out blog sites, as you can imagine. There are ways to do it in Flask. There are ways to do it in Vue. There's VuePress, which I was not able to figure out. I think it's just I didn't have the time to sit through and read through all of this. I'm sure it's very powerful, but I prefer to essentially know what's going on in my applications. And so let's build this from the ground up. That's not to say you can't use something like VuePress. For Flask, there are other options. There are even great blogging options if you don't want to mess with things with Flask. There's this Butter CMS. Now this is a paid service. I don't have any affiliation with them, but the blogging interfaces look really beautiful. So there's that. Flask and Vue.js. There's a lot of ways that you can go building out static websites or even launching blogs. So this is a shout out to YEV. This post, I am writing this at the end of April. This post was created March 18th, and it was the perfect post to follow along, creating a simple blog using Vue with Markdown to get this going. So a lot of this code in this video is based on this blog post. So there's that. So let me run through the basic files that you need to get this going. As you can see, I already have this working, at least in a really simple way on this blog. So I have two sections. I have announcements and I have posts, and I will go through how I set that up. Let's do it. Okay, so this is our Clout folder. If you've been following along, it's essentially that Flask Vue.js template that I referenced in the last video. Here we're going to be working within source. SRC is where all of the Vue components live. we also need to be aware of our view config.js. So as you'll recall, I am running this. I am inside Clout. I have my pip environment set up here. I run the Python version of it by doing python application.py. I run the front-end Flask, front-end VueJS version, which I don't need in production because I build the assets statically by running yarn serve. Okay, so that will run and come up, and that'll auto launch. So let's just step through. I don't know that I want to just walk through this blog post, but maybe that's what I'll do just in the beginning here. Again, this is a really great blog post for launching static VueJS Markdown site. Let's dive into it. So the first thing you want to do is go to your view config.js. This is what it looked like essentially before this change. We just had this. You can just essentially copy that that requirement here from this blog post and paste it in. You might need to install, I forget, you might need to install view Markdown loader. I'm not sure about that. If you're having problems after you put this this piece of code in your view config, that might be the issue. Okay, so that's it. We're done with view config.js. I'm not going to mess around with that too much anymore. Okay, so next what we want to do is we want to create, so this is source. Again, this is where our VueJS files live. We want to create a folder called Markdowns. It doesn't have to be Markdown. I'm going to change this. This kind of bothers me that it's called Markdowns. I'm going to change the name to, let's say, the blog. Okay, so this is where the blog is going to live. And then my yarn might start to throw up on that. Let's see. No, it didn't. Probably because it's, well, that's interesting. Okay. Maybe because it's compiled. I'm not sure. So I changed this to blog. Okay. And then within here, you can create, you can either just start putting Markdown files, or you could create, which is what I have done, sections, themes that you want. I have posts and announcements. Okay, and announcements I'll do, you could start writing Markdown, right? So here, so announcements, let's do header 1, launching Clout. And then we just launched Clout website, welcome. Okay, so that's just foo.md is the Markdown extension here at the end. And then post, another post, let's just call this heading 2, first post. This is our test first post. Okay, so here are my themes, announcements, and posts. Okay, so let's try and see if we can render both of these on the site. So what do we need to do to accomplish that? It's not there yet because I haven't refreshed. Okay, so then in app.view, so what do we have? We have our Markdown files in our blog directory. Now we want to go to app.view, and in here, so this is a .view file, and it contains our template section. It contains a style section. It'll also contain, it can contain a script section. Okay, I'm not doing this in app.view. I am doing this in my home.view in my views section. We're going to import our blog entries. Now, before we get to the importing of the blog entries, by the way, we're going to import it from the components. But before we do that, what we need to do is set up our blogs.json. I just put it in the top directory of .src just to make it flat. I have announcements and posts, right? So the ID is the ID of the blog entries, foo.md, March 10th, title foo. Let me title this bar and see what happens. Okay, and then here's a description. So this is the metadata about our posts, and these are, this blogs.json is the is essentially telling our website, telling the Vue site what to load, what it's called, and then some metadata about it that we will display later. So create a blogs.json file in your top layer. Now we need to go to our router. Okay, now this is a bit more complicated than it might need to be. It's a bit more complicated because we have those themes that we're applying. If you want a simpler way into this, I encourage you to go and read that blog post. There's a simpler way to get started here. But this is our router.js file. And this function here, setting the blog routes and their children, is essentially going into, I changed this to blog, and finding the ID of the items that we want to load from blogs.json. So import blog entries from blogs.json, which we just created, and then do this JavaScript stuff to get into blog, which is where our Markdown files live, and then return views, a component blog.view. And then finally in the routes, okay, so this router.js file, which tells VueJS how to route, had /home /API, and you can see those on the site. If you go to /API, maybe this will crash. So that is the documentation for the Flask REST Plus routes. And then blog routes, right? So these are all of the blog routes that we are building, right? So if we have hundreds of blogs, it'll go into this blog routes constant, and then we'll load them onto the site. So that's our router.js file. I'm going to save that because I changed this from Markdowns to blog. And that tells us the routes to the blog post that we're creating. And we reference in here our views, our view blog.view. Okay, and this is just a template for our blog post. So it's going to wrap each blog post that we make. You'll notice we have a little back button here, right? So so this is nice because this is going to affect every blog post that we make. So it's pushing this as a component into blog.view. So let's do away with that. So back to our home.view in views. We load blogs, the blogs component, blog entries. All this other stuff is just what I originally had on the site, so we can ignore it for now. And then in our script, we're loading our components. We load the hello world message. But now we're going to also load the computed entries, the blog entries. One other thing here is we need a little section of code, a little for loop, that is how we'll display those blog posts on the site. So loop through all the blogs. This is essentially what this is doing. And then here's the Jinja templating right here. This will tell us to, well, what this does is push the link to the title so that we can link from the title. We get our subtitle, we get the date, and we have a little description down here. So all of this is good. Now what should happen when I, so let's see. So this had an unexpected error, the import in my yarn.serve. But when I yarn serve this again, Let's see if that'll start up. So I might have gone through that quickly, but you'll notice it's not a lot of files that you need to make this work. Okay, announcements, I changed that to bar. I changed this to posts. Okay, so first post, this is our test first post. And bar, which is launching cloud. So that was my head or header 1 tag. We just launched the cloud website. Welcome. And then we get the rest of the templating stuff up here. But here's our blog post. It's in Markdown, so we get everything related to Markdown. Markdown is pretty straightforward to learn, and it's really useful to learn. So that's it. I mean, we have, we could build a nav bar, which I think I'll do in a later video. But we have the essential ingredients here to make a static VueJS blog. And then all I need to do, so let me change this from announcements. I want to launch this now. So we have our AWS Elastic Beanstalk instance. And now we just changed some of our blog posts. How do we deploy this? Okay, so that blog post doesn't go over deployment, but what I'm going to do is Npm Run Build, which will build the static Vue assets. In prior videos, I might have done yarn build, but I think that's being deprecated. I'm not sure about that. Npm Run Build, I believe, is the way you want to go. So this build completed. Now let me just show you, well, okay. So the build completed. So we have our static assets. Let me just commit all of this. Git commit, let's say updating the blog posts, not great. So what Vue, I'm not sure if this is a Vue thing or this is a this repo thing, but it always checks. It always does a linting before I push, which is nice. It's also kind of annoying. Okay, so EB deploy. So this is our Elastic Beanstalk. This is our Elastic Beanstalk command EB. Again, we set this up in the last video, but this will allow us, we just type EB deploy, and this will run and deploy the latest version of our site and make the blog post that we just worked on. We'll push it live. So you could see that our workflow here is now going to be add a blog post, add some metadata to it, commit, and then deploy it. This is, a little bit more complicated than if you had WordPress. You just save and publish. But we are controlling every aspect of our site now, and we have full control over how it's displayed, everything about it. And you don't have to go through the frustrations of WordPress. Sometimes it's kind of frustrating if you have something that you want to do and you can't figure out how to do it, and so you feel like you're hacking WordPress a bit. Okay, so now this is done deploying. So if I do EB open, what it should do for me is open up another browser, which it's doing, and here it is. So launching cloud. This is deployed. It's really that easy. So stick around. I think in the next video, what we might do is some web scraping. We might get back to visualizations. This website needs to come together so that we can launch it formally. We need to change this this URL here. There are a lot of sweeping up things to do. I feel like the bones are here, but we need to start offering some value to folks. We need to get the blog actually launched with some posts that will draw eyeballs to it. And so we will do all of that in the coming videos. So stick around. We'll get back to it.